You've used Supertest to test the sign-up route which creates data and the login route which needs existing data to be in place. In this lesson, you're going to learn how to test an endpoint that requires authentication in order to work, such as the endpoint for getting your user profile or the endpoint for deleting and closing your account. So to get this done, we need an authentication token that Supertest in our test cases can actually access, much like our test cases accessed the user's credentials down below. So what we're going to do is start by modifying the data up here. We want to make sure that when we save this user to the database, they have an authentication token that can be used by our test cases. Now, to get this done, we'll need to do two very important things. First up, we'll need to generate our own object ID for this user. We'll need to know what the ID is ahead of time so we can actually create the correct token. And then two, we'll have to create the token. So up above, let's go ahead and load in the additional stuff we're going to need. And don't worry, in a couple of videos, we'll talk about how we can better structure things so it's not all in a single file. For now, though, we'll go ahead and load in first JWT so I can generate that JSON Web Token. So I'll load that NPM library in, which is already installed. And next up, we're going to load in Mongoose so we can actually generate our very own object ID. Right here, requiring that library. Perfect. Now down below, let's start by creating the ID. I'm going to create a new variable called user1 ID, and we're going to use Mongoose to generate a new ID. And we do that using the following code, the new operator with the following, that is mongoose.types.object_ID, just like that. Now, the reason I'm creating this as a standalone variable outside of this object is because I need to use it in two places. I'll be using it once right here as the ID for the user, so user1 ID, and I'll be using it again when I actually add tokens to the user we create. So right here, I'll add a comma after password, and we'll set up a tokens array so we can give this user an authentication token which we can use. That's the whole purpose of doing this. Right here, we're going to set up that token property, and we're going to create a new JSON Web Token using jwt.sign exactly like we would have done from anywhere else in our app. Now, to create a valid one, all we do is provide the ID like we've been doing before, user1 ID, and we also provide the secret process .env right here, jwt_secret. Now that we have this in place, when our test user gets created, we will have an ID and a token associated with that user that we can take advantage of. Now, if I save things in their current state, I would expect everything to be working as expected. Right here, my test cases are running, and I have 9 passing tests. That means down below, we can actually go ahead and use this token to create a new test case that interacts with one of our endpoints that requires authentication. Down below, let's go ahead and start with the endpoint for fetching the user's profile. Let's get started with our first test case. We can pick a name for this one, something like should get profile for user, and we'll set it up as an async function. And the first and pretty much only thing we're going to do inside of here, like our other test cases, is use Supertest. So I will call request, I'll pass in the express app, and this time, to get the profile, it is a get HTTP request instead of post, so I will use get. From there, we're going to go ahead and provide the path that is /users/me. Now we can go ahead and send that off by calling send. We can leave this as empty. There is no need to provide a request body. And last up, we'll expect something. I'll expect that I get a 200 back when things go well. Now, the problem here is that at no point do we set up the authentication header. So if we did try to run this, we would not get a 200 back. We can see down below this one new test is failing. What we need to do is tell Supertest we want to set the authorization header. Now to do this, I'm going to restructure the code a little bit. When we work with an API that has a lot of chaining, there are a lot of different ways people seem to structure it. In general, it's a good idea to keep the different method calls on their own line. So this allows you to stay a bit organized. So something like this is clear and easy to parse mentally. So we'll use an approach like this. You could also leave the first method call on the original line. You'll see some people use something like this as well. It's not important which one you use. It's important, though, that you do go ahead and stay consistent. Now, yes, we have some inconsistencies. We'll address those in a little bit. For now, I'll go ahead and leave each method call on its own line. Perfect. So to set the header, we use the set method, and we want to use it before we send the request off. So I'll use it right here. That is .set, and we provide to it two arguments. The first is the name of the header we're trying to set. In our case, as we know, that is authorization. And the second is the value we're trying to set. Now, this is going to include our token. So I'll go ahead and stick with a template string here. And we start off with bearer, space, followed by that token right here. Inside of the template string, I'll use the syntax for injecting a value, and the value is stored on user1. It is user1.tokens. That's an array. We'll grab the first one and we'll access the token property. So this right here is exactly what we had set up above. It is the value that comes back from jwt.sign. Now, this is going to work if what? If the server confirms that this token is valid, it's not expired, and it's actually stored in the tokens array for that user. If I save the user test suite, it's going to rerun everything, and hopefully we are back to a completely passing test suite, and we are. 10 of 10 passing tests. So we use set to set up headers, and the only time we're going to use that in this class is when we're trying to set our authorization header. Now down below, let's go ahead and create a test case for ensuring that things fail when you're not authenticated and you're trying to fetch the profile. Then there'll be a challenge for you to test a different endpoint on your own. So right here, test should not get profile for unauthenticated user. Then we'll set it up as an async function. And down below, we'll actually go through that process. So very similar to what we had above. I'll use await, calling request, passing in the express app. On the next line, .get /users/me. Then we're going to go ahead and send that one off without any token, and we are going to expect a 401. That is the status code we get back when our auth middleware can't validate the authentication being provided. So right here, none is provided. I would definitely expect a 401. And I'm going to save things for the final time and make sure we now see 11 passing tests, and that is exactly what we're getting. So now it's challenge time. You'll be writing 2 test cases for the endpoint that allows users to close their account. Let's go ahead and talk about what I'd like you to do. Right here, you're going to be setting up 2 tests for deleting accounts. One is going to make sure it works when you're authenticated, and the other will make sure it fails when you're not authenticated. So the first one could be called something like should delete account for user. In this case, you do want to set up the authentication header, and you want to make sure you get that correct success status code back. Now, to actually make the request, instead of using post or get, you'll use the delete method provided. That's the same method we set up the delete account endpoint with, the HTTP delete method. Next up, you'll create the second test, should not delete account for unauthenticated user. In this case, you will not provide the auth header, but you will expect the correct status code given the fact that they're not authenticated. And finally, you'll test your work. You should have 13 passing tests when all is said and done. Now, if you need to jog your memory about exactly what status codes you're going to get back or how that endpoint works, feel free to pull up that code. That's not violating the challenge rules. You're allowed to use anything we've done in the course so far in order to solve these. Take some time to get it done. When you're done, come back and click play. How'd that go? Let's get to it. Up above, I'm going to add the first of those 2 test cases. We'll just go one at a time. Right here, test The following name or something similar should delete account. For user, we want to make sure that works. Now, in a couple of videos, we'll get into more advanced assertions where we could do something like see if there's actually no account in the database. For now, though, just going off of the response status code will get us started. So async. Right here, we are going to use supertest. So I will use await. I'll call request, passing in the app, and we'll set up things using delete with the following path, that is /users/me to delete your own account. Now, in this case, I do want to provide authentication. So right here, .set, setting up that header, authorization, with the following value, once again, bearer, space followed by the token, that is user1.tokens, grabbing the first item in that array, whoops, not the one with the index of 9, index of 0, then accessing the token property on it. Now, with that in place, we should be able to continue on actually sending this off and asserting something about the response. So right here, .send to send it off, no request body necessary, and then .expect to expect something about the status code that would be a 200 if it's deleted. Now we can go ahead and save things, and we can test out this one test case before adding multiple. It's passing, so now we can continue on to the other one. Right here, another test. Test should not delete account for unauthenticated user. Excellent. We'll set it up as an async function, and we'll go ahead and use supertest. Await, a call to request, passing in the app. Once again, still using delete and still using /users/me. After that, though, no header. We're just going to send things off without any sort of authentication, and I will expect in that case to get a 401 back. Now we just need to test our work for that second test case, so I'll remove the challenge comments. I can save the file and we'll see what we get. Down below, I would be expecting, I believe, 13 or 14, there it is, 13 passing tests. So now we know how to use supertest singular, with our endpoints that require authentication. This is going to allow us to test everything else we have in our application. We could test the ability to create tasks, edit them, or delete them. Though in the next video, what I want to do is not necessarily test new endpoints, but explore how we can add more assertions to endpoints like this one, for example, asserting that we get an authentication token back. We'll start to talk about how we can do that in the next lesson. I'm excited to get to it, and I'll see you then.